interview is being conducted for Inverkeithing People Making History Oral History Project. My name is Dr Sue Morrison and the respondent is John Ian Innes. He's known as Ian. This is the 26th of October 2021 and the interview is taking place in Inverkeithing Civic Centre. Thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed for the project, Ian. For the record, would you please confirm your full name?
John Dick Stobie Innes, known as Ian.
Thank you. Ian, could you tell me what is your age or your year of birth?
1944.
Thank you. Where were you born?
North Queensferry.
And where do you live now?
North Queensferry.
Have you ever moved from there?
No.
Excellent. And that's just outside Inverkeithing?
That's 2 miles down the road.
Yeah.
I've only lived in 3 houses in that whole time.
Really?
Yeah.
Could you tell me about your family when you were young?
Well, I was born in Brunton's Buildings in North Queensferry. It's now Forside Terrace, North Queensferry. That's just under the rail bridge, or next to the rail bridge, near Deep Sea World. My auntie, my granny lived across the road. My auntie lived a couple of doors up there, us on the same row. And we were called the Bug Raw Kids. Brunton's Buildings shortened, but it sounds a wee worse than that. From there, my granddad had a sawmill in where Deep Sea World is. A big deep saw in there, like a big engine sort of. And at 6-year-old, moved up to Queen Margaret Place in North Queensferry. That's up by the railway station, along for the school, which I went to North Queensferry School. From there, I enjoyed my schooling. I had a brother, Gordon, who was born 2 years after me in 46. I had my other brother, Alan, was born in 48. And then the twins were born in 52, that was 2 years after we went up the road. Went to North Queensferry School, enjoyed that. Felt I was quite good on mental arithmetic until the headmaster asked me to do all my workings, and it slowed me right down. I used to have the answers by the time he actually said the question, even though it was maybe difficult, whatever, and that put me off mental arithmetic. But I don't know if it's just the right time to say it, but the downside of some of that family system was my brother in September, he fell off a tree just opposite where I'm staying now at Inchcombe Drive, and 5 days later he passed away. The platform hit him on the back of the head. He was 10-year-old, I was 12-year-old, so as the story goes, that'll be part of my situation leading up to me ending up in the paper mill. So basically that hit me pretty hard. I would say the biggest change was that if you know the times, there were no lights or anything, or very little lights about the streets and that, and used to play hide and seek and that, and you were always looking over your shoulder if somebody was not so much going to catch you, but just for fear of or whatever. But once that happened to Gordon, I could walk anywhere. Nothing could ever do anything to me that hadn't happened to Gordon, if you get me, accident-wise like. So just going by that one, the normal rotation from North Queensferry School was go to Inverkeithing, which is the local one up here, the one that was burnt down, which I had some good times there, enjoyed that. A highlight of my last year at school was my granda acted as a guarantee for a push bike. It had bone shakers, everything like that. But that was just a bike thrown together, sometimes no tyres and all that. And we went to Halfords and we got this bike, a spanking bike at that time, £18, but it was like, that was top of the range at that time, money was. So the reason I brought that up was because he acted as guarantor. He was only 58 at the time. He was swimming down North Queensferry Port Lane and he took a heart attack and he died there on 1958. So that was just another kick in the whatever, if you get what I mean, for my life wise. So that, what happened then was I only had paid one payment, maybe 2 payments of the bike, so I got the bike for nothing on the death kills, whatever, at that time. It doesn't happen now, but it did then. So from there, everything's going well enough at school, apart from when I went to Queen Anne Street to sit my O-levels, and I was expected, out of 8, I was expected to get 7 when they were, and I never got any because my father had left home, just to add another wee picture to the story. So where I was going to be at that time a telephone mechanic as an apprentice or whatever, engineer apprentice, electrician, they were my aims. And I thought I was clever enough for that, but because of what happened with Dad going away, that left me with my mum, and given Gordon had died in 56, that actually put me in a position where I had to actually earn money to keep the family. So that went on from my first wage. One of the first wages I can remember getting was £4 5 shillings. My mother got the £4, I got the 5 shillings. And you'll not believe it, but I had change at the end of the week off my 5 shillings, if you get what I mean. So that shows you how you could be frugal or whatever. And as time went on, as I got on in the mill, and as I ended up like cutters and reelers and whatever, I got onto a job where I was on shift work and there were overtime opportunities. So I suggested to my mum that to encourage me to work overtime, that wouldn't be a problem, but she could get all my wages and I would keep the overtime if it was possible and give her extra if I could, which then set me on the savings situation. So I had a theory. Mum and Dad never had very much money, and I think some of the reason my dad left, apart from another woman, would be because times are so hard. Because his wage at the time for 6 years would be £7 a week take home, so there wasn't much money to go about. But we never were short of food, clothing, that sort of stuff. And Mother always looked after us, whatever. So that was, I don't know if I'm going on a wee bit, but I think I've got to finish this part of the story. The situation from there was that my mum had 2 good friends that I knew as well. Mrs. Oh, geez, this is where the old memory comes in. Right, I can't remember. John Liza and I can't remember her name again, but they spoke for me in the mill, and I managed to get a job in there as a broke laddie, and that's where I got the wages that I could actually keep the rest of the family, because none of them were of working age at that time. I was the only one. I was the oldest of the family. So from there, once I got into working a wee bit overtime and that, I managed to start saving. And I had a theory that if I saved 50, I could spend 25, even though I might not. If I got to that point, I would then save 100, and my limit would be £50 spent. So I went on for that to that, and it's sort of, because of the shortages, Mum and Dad with money, I decided that was going to happen to me. And I would say, as the story goes, everything worked out, and because I went in the mill, I maybe didn't design to go there, but I actually was so grateful of that job, because at that time, unless you had somebody speaking for you or had a family member in the mill, you wouldn't get a job in the mill. I mean, you're talking about 800 odd people in Colwell's at that time, and I thought I was a lucky one to get a job. Even though on the other side of it at that time I'd be thinking, how could it have been if I'd went the other way? But I look at my whole life and I say, hard times, whatever, but I wouldn't change one issue of the whole thing. That sad story's no stopped yet, by the way. From that point onwards, I met my present wife in 1966, and we got on quite well. I had asked her to marry me in 67, and Mum died in 67. But what that did then was changed. I couldn't ask Mary to come and look after the family, so I had to let that develop and see if it was going to be all right. So we put the wedding back from, say it would be sometime in 68, and we eventually got married in 69. But that changed all my plans about buying a house and all that carry on. So I had to take over the family like what Mum had done with Dad left. So if you look at that in its entirety, I should have been something else, if you get what I mean. And I was not a good kid, and I don't mean that against kids, because I've understanding of kids through my understanding of youngsters and how people develop and how their minds are and that, because of going into the youth work and youth leader and all that sort of stuff, health and safety, what do you call it? Say, going for, this is where the old age gets angered, going for the knowing about health and that, I was able to do a lot of stuff on the health side to understand how people had this, that and next thing. In general, from there, I just did my best to support the family, minding that I had to support Mary and make sure that Mary was okay with what was going on, because when I asked her, everything was hunky-dory. In other words, I would have still supported my mum in the bairns, but we would have had our own life, but that changed. But Mary being Mary, she'd been brought up in a big family. She knew, she come from Ireland, her father was a farmer, they'd moved over here in 63, so she knew all about bringing kids up and things like that. Being the oldest family again, like myself, she ended up taking on that onus. Without saying too much, it's difficult for a woman to come into a family and be as respected as it, because they're taking my mum's place. So you can see where that, you maybe understand that, what I'm trying to come to. So from there, I looked after my finances as I always do, because that's what's kept me in good stead till the present day. I ended up going onto the cutters in the mill with Bert Roxburgh, who was a good friend of mine for the years. He's dead now, but he was a very good friend of mine. My best friend, who's 2 years on the same day as me, younger than me, born like Dougie Harper, he married Bert's daughter. So we've still got that association here. Although Bert and his wife are away now. But he learnt me a lot of things about life and about people and that sort of stuff. And then I moved from there on to the calendars, that's super calendars they called them at that time. Reelers, through onto pair machine. Number one pair machine was the one that I went on to. There were 5 pair machines, and I ended up starting on number 1 as a brocklady. Still trying to do my best. Whatever job I got, I always try to keep a smile on my face. In other words, if it was hard, then I wouldn't be going about down about it. I would keep a smile on my face. Maybe somebody else thought it was a frown, but I always felt happy with it myself, because I felt it was better to work when you're happy than it was when you were down when you go in. So for there I worked my way on number 1, and eventually there came an opportunity to be a dryerman on number 1. So I moved on, that's the next phase up. And then I was on with Jock Grieve, who was a ferryman, which, funny, grumpy kid. I don't know if you know these type of grumpy boys and that, where they don't want you to help them, but if you help them, they're quite happy. So one of the most funniest things it was funny, but it was kind of exciting at the time. In other words, I ran away to try and learn something about the pair machine's job. I would volunteer to do some of the work he'd done, and in the old days they had an open flow box, which, if you can imagine a froth building up behind a kind of dam, would be the picture you get. And you went in there with and you just squared it off and you lifted it, and it was like a loaf of bread you were lifting out, so you lifted it out. And if you lifted it out too quickly, it caused a suction underneath, and it took some of that underneath, and then you would break on the machine, and that was it got the press. So when you go up and do that, and you're kneeling on a bar and reaching to get this, so I'd done the job, and I thought, oh, that's great. So the next roll came out, and I took a sheet down, I weighed it. I says to Jock, look, it's 28 £, Jock. You want me to put a wee bit on? So, aye, on you go, Ian, if you know what you're doing. Well, if you can imagine, there's a big, you get a small sort of valve. Well, this is a big valve with a handle like that, and you went along and you tapped it with some, just to get a wee knock, right? And that put a wee drop more stock into the pipeline. So I did that. I wanders up, like I'm the sort of like active machine man. I've done a wee bit, So anyway, the next roll comes out. I didn't get a chance to take the sheet off. Jock comes up and gets the sheet. He goes down and weighs it, and I thought, there's something wrong here. So he says, I says, what's wrong, Jock? Well, I'll tell you what, you're going to do a man's job, you've got to do it all. He says, what you done, you done a good job, you put the weight on. You never checked the baldwin to see if the weight had come up to the right amount, and then maybe rechecked the sheet if you weren't sure. So he only done half the job, and he chased me. He was just kidding on, but it didn't look as though he was kidding on at the time, but I know it was kidding on later on. But these are the sort of life things that you get that make you, how can you say, the person you are today. And Jock and I got a house on fire, especially if we went for a drink at the shore bar after a night shift or something. Used to have a couple in there and then come away home. But these are just the sort of side issues of life. For there, I got the opportunity to be a machineman. And I'm not sure, I think it was about that time, I don't know if you mind, because you're too young, say, that they made everybody retire at 65. Talk about men, in particular because it was mostly men, it was not in the finishing side but in the working side, the papermaking side. They retired everybody. I think it was the Labour government, I think it brought in. And they retired everybody, and that took a wealth. I mean, you had people at 80 odd year old that were just finished up, you know. That learnt me another lifestyle as well when that happened. But that gave me the opportunity then to move up the ladder, because you could be 15 years as a driverman, not even get a move to it, but that caused the movement within the mill. So I ended up getting the number 1 machine man's job. Not that it's the number 1 machine, number 5 was the big machine. That was the machine I was on. So because of my youth work and whatever, my whole aim as a machine man was to do my job right, but also work as a team. Like, together as a team was the secret for good work, and encourage people to work as best they can for the company but for themselves, and the end result was good paper, as it would turn out, or good workmanship. So from there I progressed to, because I was a machine man, there were opportunities to cover jobs on different machines. So invariably I could be on number 2, 3, 4, but I was never really on number 5, because that was like the flagship. But as a young machine man, I think I was the youngest machine man at the time that was on, and I think everybody looked for me to fail, but me being determined, I wasn't going to. So from there, my experience got up. I got a reputation for, I feel anyway, maybe that's me personally believing with the end story, that I actually learnt an awful lot about work and whatever, and it showed. And anyway, so whenever number 5 machine vacancy come up, I didn't put in for it, because I felt there were more people than me, more experienced, whatever. But I was approached to take it on and go on it, and I did. And that was the pinnacle of pay rate. But what you've got to remember in the days, paper making was like, if you go back to the days where they made paper in a hand sieve, handmade, we weren't far off of that on a paper machine with the wire gauze and whatever, and ran and cylinders and presses and all that kind of calendars to put the finish on it, that sort of stuff. And then putting a spray on the sheet to go to the super calendars to give it a higher gloss and this sort of stuff. And the things we used to do with people, I remember one just a bit, it's not too much. We had one of the machinemen on number 1 was called McCormick, was his second name, but we called him Cowboy. Now you might think, why did we call him Cowboy? Was there, you know? But the reason he was called Cowboy, and if anything went wrong, I'll not tell you what he did, but at this minute. But what we used to do, because we seen what he did when he seen something wrong, we actually took a piece of paper, and in that sprays that were in the cooling rolls, we used to put a paper down and make it cut lines in the paper. So the next break we had, I would take a tail down to him and show him this tail, which was all these strips. And he would stand, scratch his head, and then he would jump on his horse, like jump, 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 and then go. And that's how we hang with it. We used to do things like that to kind of get him to do the mimic, like, you know. If he caught us, he would have been hitting us with a stick. But that's just funny side. From there, I was a few years on number 5, and then the opportunity come up when it was Mr. Arnott retired being the senior foreman, and there were a vacancy in the foreman, so I ended up getting a vacancy there on the foreman's job. And if you think about being a foreman in a sort of 5 machines, the actual salary at that time was £3,200, which in present day terms would be, it's the same as when I was on the cutters, it was only 2 shillings an hour. So if you look at that kind of thing, there's not a lot of money going about, but it was plenty for the time, if you get what I mean. When I got, just a point, when I got married in 69, August 69, my last take home pay in 69 for a pair machineman and getting married was £18 a week. So, and I also had a family to look after as well at the same time. So that puts a lot in perspective as how, you know, in a way I've been so lucky to get on and whatever. Basically for there, the vacancies come up for shift manager, and I ended up going on with Sammy Hamilton, who was for North Queensferry. He was a shift manager. Oh, I was a shift manager with him, sorry. I was on with him as supervisor. And there's 2 wee tales about Sammy. Sammy was called Sammy because he fell in mud sometime and he got a black face. Now, I never knew that for years and years. But I knew him as Sammy, and I never ever knew. I thought it was for Samuel or something. So, a couple of wee funnies about him. This night he came in on shift and he had a frozen shoulder, as you would call it. And he was in agony. So, he says, Ian, this is terrible, this is terrible. All night I was getting it for him. So he tried his new boots on. So halfway through the shift, I'm going to try his new boots on, just for the sake of it. The next thing I knew, he's going to say my shoulder's all right now. But by the end of the shift, his feet were sore. So he took the boots off and the shoulder was back. It's like a focal point. I learned that later on in medicine, why that was. The other tricky one was, we're both colour matchers, supervisors, colour matchers, shift manager. Your colour matching, Sam and I were quite aligned with each other. We could see the same colours, same hue, same sort of, like if I said to you that if I was looking at that white paper, it could be sort of bluey looking, it could be greeny looking, it could be reddy looking, you know, in the hues and the LEDs and that. This night, all of a sudden, we couldn't see the same colour. And he told me it was me. Your eyes have changed. Maybe they have, I don't know. So this went on all night, and we're bickering about that colour's this and that colour's that. So we kind of hedged between the 2 colours, but Sammy being the senior man, he got the vote. So he went out and he left his glasses lying, so I put the glasses on. Here he had new glasses, but they were slightly tinted. And as soon as I seen that, when he come back in, I said, Sammy, I can see the same colour as you now. And I put the glasses on. I says, they're tinted. I never asked for tinted, I says, but they're tinted. I says, it changed the colour. But as soon as I put them on, you could see that thing. So, of course, he was a bit of a fox. He was known as a fox, so he was a bit of a fox. So you sort of, I would come up with a good idea. He would actually down it, not viciously or anything, but he would pooh-hoo it a wee bit. Then he went away and adopted it. So I learned not to tell Sammy too much sometimes if it was something that way, like, you know.
Thanks for all that, Ian. It's very enlightening. Could I just ask you a bit about the conditions in the mill? Well,
the conditions in the mill were, like, especially in the pair machine side, it was very hot, very humid. I would say quite tedious when you had to work hard, when you were, because on the pair machine, when it was ran sweet and it was ran whatever, you were literally just taking a roll out, taking it to the next process. But in between that, if you had any break in it, especially in the early days, where there were no hog pits or anything like that. Everything went up the press, so you had to load that into a barrow or square tub. And any loose paper, you had to make out sheets and roll it up in bundles, carry them away and that sort of stuff. So there were quite a lot of physical work in the days. That progressed to when you went on to number 5, and it had a bit of trouble, a lot of trouble. It had 5 calendars on it, huge stacks of calendars, and if you had them full underneath, they actually were scalding when you were in there taking it out of the eye. And there were many a time where the shift before had battled all day, and then it was your turn to go, come in on shift, and you had to pick up all their stuff, as well as whoever was on had to sort what was causing the problem, and you had all that time, you know. So it's sort of, in the early days, I would say, like, going back to conditions, all the pair machines were hand-led at that time. There were no shearing ropes or anything like that you could feed a tail into. You had to tear a tail, or at the calendars you had to put a knife on the roller and cut a tail while somebody took it past the next bit. So basically, like say things shut down and whatever, we used to make, because we had asparto grass as a manufacturer, we used to produce pulp ourselves through asparto grass. That gave us off a lea, which we cleaned the dandy. It was a chemical called lea. We also had sulfuric acid that was like, if you get acid now, it's like tepid compared with this stuff. And if it ever splashed on your overalls, they went purple and then fell to bits. And the main place we used to put them was in the strainers. That was like the fibre strainers prior to the V-bolts to go in a pair machine. So you were handing up buckets of that, and you were also shoving what I called a broke bin, but it had a broke bin with a lid on it, and you were shoving this stuff in it, and if you hit a bump, another was splashing everywhere. So that part of it was quite dangerous, especially if you got it in your eyes and that. And health and safety being what it was in the days was not anything like what it is today. That was another thing that I learned over the years, how to do the health and safety and get the best out of problems that you had, which worked out pretty good as I got on to management and that sort of stuff, where I was able to deal with factory inspectors and that sort of stuff. Because papermaking was so dangerous at that time, and it still was even in the latter times. But when you were hand feeding, there were on 2 occasions I was at the side of a boy as he's actually feeding into the bottom cylinder, and he put his hand too far in and he got his arm in there, but I managed to get him round the waist and pull him out. He just got a burnt arm, but it wasn't too severe like. But that could have been more severe if I hadn't been able to pull him, because he wouldn't have been able to stop his cell going in, if you get what I mean. But in general, if you watch what you're doing, it wasn't too bad. But like say calendars and things like that, the dryerman that I used to work with, Morris Johnson, on number 1 to begin with, what used to happen on the calendars was that you got like what I call a blotch coming over in the paper, but it was wet because it wasn't dried out, and it stuck to the calendar, and it was called a stamp. So it would make a stamp in the paper, and you had to be looking through the sheet very regular, checking there were no stamps or anything like that, and then go out with a blade and take it off. Well, Morris went in this morning, he was at his breakfast, he left me, we were sitting in the seat in our breakfast, the machine ran well, he went in to check, and he ran his hand along, the next thing his hand up into the nip, like come out, and his fingers were like shredded. No, just the points. I mean, he recovered for it, but I'll tell you, it looked bad at the time. Just it was like as if this part of his finger was like extended out like a nail. So basically, that was a big danger. Like if you got caught there, because you had nip bars that stopped you getting your hand in, but it also caught you because it was only a small gap. If you had it any bigger, it would take your hand in, so it nipped you, and that's what it was called, a nip. But they come out and they never even said a word. They just come and looked at me, and I says, "Aye, I see what you've done." And at that time, the mill being a dangerous place, or paper making being dangerous, we actually had a surgery with a fire engine, although it was antiquated. We had an ambulance, which one night I took somebody up to Dunfermline in it, and I don't know, they're supposed to be comfortable, but if you hit a bump on the road for the next mile, you were taking it was that easy sprung. It was a right old type, you know, the old shaped one like this. I'd never driven anything like that in my life before, but it was quite an experience. It was all sort of like Sugarleaf when you were going over there. But many a time I would say I've been, that was 1, 2, maybe 3 times that I've managed to pull somebody from the thing, just because I was in the vicinity, like, and realised that it had reached in too far, like, you know. But what was I going to say? On going back to the making of the spartogras, they had to put it through like a thresher and all that to get some of the stuff out of it and that. Well, quite a bit of dust used to be in there. Now, in the old days, to start a motor, the electric motor, big heavy motors, you had to push down a starter handle and draw it up and click it in. Well, I was at the ice skating in Murrayfield. I got off the train at North Queensferry, and the buzz was going about that somebody had been killed in the mill. The whole place had blew up with this ignition. One boy got killed and one boy was that severely injured. They never really recovered. I think he died about a year later. On the lee side, there was a boy killed as well, where they had the lee tanks and that. If you mind right, your cup of tea used to be in an enamel cup. Well, he put his cup down just at the inspection hatch, and it fell in, and the reaction between that metal and thing, it threw all this stuff back out of him, and his skin was just peeling off him, like. But that's just that's the fatalities I know about in the mill at that time. So it was dangerous, and you wouldn't expect it to be where, but at that time they were even thinking it might have been a bomb that was in some, but that was just, you know how it goes. It wasn't a bomb, it was like they'd discovered it. It actually moved. If you had a wall here, it actually moved that wall intact up against that wall. And the floors were about 3 foot thick of concrete, and it even shattered that way, the thing with. They redesigned the whole place, put a new place outside for ventilation and all that carry on, and then shut it down. So it was, they'd done away with Sparto then, because Sparto was really like a very soft kind of fibre, and you could make very highly glazed Ashdown watermark and all that kind of thing. I haven't mentioned the watermarks, but that number 1 machine was, you could say, the top watermark machine in the mill, with the number of dandies that it ever had to use. Keith Mill watermark, if I mind right, used to have 7 different dandies for all the different sizes that we had to make and whatever. And you had a whole place like this full of dandies. When I talk about a dandy, it's like a cylinder, gauze cylinder, this in circumference it used to be at that time, standing on end in racks, and you had a place like this full of them. Just as a side issue, when they went to Europe and we went to decimalisation, that caused big money spent on all paper mills that had any occasion because we were all the imperial sizes, and all the dandies had to change to meet A4 sizes, or kind of A4, A3, everything had to change. So all the dandies got put up to the old distillery, which is the Maltons now, and then eventually they had to be scrapped. So that was money down the drain, sorry. And I suppose in the long run that maybe demised the mill in its long run, not at that time, but in years to come maybe that was a situation, basically, I would say, unless there's more you want to know about paper making, I could tell you more, but
no, I think you've covered everything. Thank you. What I would like to ask you is, though, what is your favourite memory of the paper mill?
I think it's not an easy one to answer, because I always felt that I was under pressure to prove myself. Given my family history, I always felt that I had to prove myself at everything I was doing, without being over enthusiastic to prove myself, if you get what I mean. But I always felt that. And most of my enjoyment was taken out of being able to get crew members and whatever to work together. And I would say the bit I didn't finish when I was telling you earlier, when the job for production manager came up, I felt I was good enough to do the job, because I could what you had before, I would say, was people that were like brought into the industry, maybe had degrees or whatever, where I had all the practical sense and that. So I felt quite confident at doing all that side. So this is where I've got to watch, because I go off on a tangent and I forget to get back on what was on again. That's the old thing. I'm back on switch. I would say a slight regret, but it was the other side of it was the enjoyable side of it. Slight regret of being production manager was that I had so many inputs, top, bottom, in, whatever, that I never really felt in control of the team, if you get what I mean, the team that was with you. I'm talking about production manager was in charge of this, that, and thing. So you had, and I would say at shift manager, if I'd stayed at shift manager, I had a very good control and understanding and responsibility to people, to me and for me to them on the shift. And when you're dealing with men more, it was like a more direct dealing with men, you got a better feeling. So I would say that was the most enjoyable side of it, where even as a machine man, having your crew and working well with the crew, and each time that I developed into another job, the crew got bigger. But that was the development I wanted, was to have a good relationship. And mind you, I was not the type of person that put a face out there, and if you come to me with a problem, I would try and honestly sort it. But if you were a bit of a lad that never, like, wasn't really wanting to work or whatever, I would get you round the corner, one way or other. I would work on you to get you round the corner, but I'd be hard and firm with you. But as soon as you got to the point of not so much doing as you're told, but understanding what you're required, I would relent a wee bit on you. And eventually people, I've even got a letter for the works manager when I finished up with the mill. When I had a heart attack in 1990. He says, for such an honorary guy, he says, the outpouring towards you was like, where did this come from? Because all he would hear was, Oh, that grump. I never put. I would send Dennis and Les out as if I was mad, right? Get there, sort him out. And they wouldn't come in and have a go at me because they were putting out the vibes that he wasn't in a good mood or whatever. And it worked. I'm not saying it worked all the time, but it worked a lot of the times. And I liked that kind of involvement between yourself and that. And as much as you could say as supervisor, shift manager and production manager, I was management. I was never always management. I would always err on the worker side, but I would never err too far on the worker side either. So I wasn't like, could I say that a lot of foremen, a lot of managers tended to say one thing to the workers and do something different. You could come at me all the time, maybe misunderstand what I said or whatever, but I was always the same type of person. I was true to what I was believing, and health and safety, a wee thing that just come up. You eventually had to wear ear defenders and all that because of the noise in the mill. So we had this general manager, and I was the production manager at the time, right? And I'm down at number 4 machine, and he was on the randan, and I couldn't hear what Sandy Wilson was saying. That was the works manager. So I put the earphones down here while he's walking down the floor. So what can you say? Right, you know. So the next thing, he comes down. I can't remember his name was. I didn't want to remember him because he got on to me. So he come down and he laid into me about not having the earphones on. But my tactic was somebody that's getting on to me. So he just said earphones, and I went like that. I couldn't hear a word he was saying. So he was going like that, and I never heard a thing. So when he walked away, I said, Sandy, what did he say? He says, you're so-and-so, he says here. I said, no. I said, he told me to put them on, so I never heard of. So it's quite funny.
Well, we'll have to leave it there because we're well over time. But thank you so much, Ian.
Well, I enjoyed meeting you.